remember where we are in the REAP course. So we are here in Identify Evangelism Network. Now, who knows what the yellow bit is?
Struggles?
Well, no, kind of. There's plenty of struggles over in the green and in the orange as well. So, yeah. What do these 4 yellow ones mean? And what does the yellow bit mean?
I think that kind of, for me, it's the get ready. So,
Exactly. It's the kind of, it's not just me, but we're not launched as a church yet. But God willing, we are going to be launched as a church. So, in one sense, what you're doing here in Identifying Evangelism Networks is you're at a stage where you're not actually road testing those ideas. So you're going to do it there or reach the area. A lot of your stuff around testing and events and so on are going to get tested there, but that's not what we're doing. Has anyone ever read War and Peace? Have you ever read War and Peace? I've never read War and Peace. It's like this.
Smack off your feeling.
It's like this huge
A
thing.
War and Peace.
No,
Flip through.
it's sort of be
But it's written by this guy called Tolstoy, who absolutely hates Napoleon. He loathes Napoleon. He thinks that Napoleon is just like a scam artist, and he like wins all these battles, not because he actually knows what's going on, but kind of because he's lucky, and you know, the French are good at their thing. Back in the day, when the French were good at their thing, and his kind of his view of it is that it's basically once the army goes into battle, you just lose control of the army. You can't command an army in battle. That's his view. And in some sense, sometimes like releasing evangelism networks does feel a bit like that. That we're planning here, but actually there's a good chance a lot of it will kind of go out the window, or we're going to have to completely rewrite it. I mean, there are so many examples I can give of this. And like Dan, for example, thought he was planting a States church and then realised that Wythenshawe was now diverse. You know, and that's going to throw up a bunch of issues. So it's important to remember where we are, that we're not at the bit where we're road testing everything. We're at the bit where we're trying to work out what we do while we gather the team. And that's super important. So on the one hand, you don't want to overpromise, but on the other hand, as a leader, you're the one who's telling them, like, well, how are we going to make disciples? Why are we all here, Chief? What's this about? Like, what are we going to do? So if you think you know all the answers, you're going to mislead people. But if you really can't come up with any answers, you're gonna like, people are going to be, yeah, cool and everything, but you know, we're going to go into battle, and we want some kind of orientation about who we are and what we're going to do. And we do want to feel that the person who's in charge of the team has got some kind of idea of how disciples are going to be made. Because if they don't, why are we here? Because after all, church plants only exist for 2 reasons. Why do we plant churches? What are the 2 reasons for planting a church?
To make disciples.
To make disciples where they're not being made already, and to grow leaders. So as you grow leaders to make disciples, you want to be able to bring a team together that actually has got some kind of grip on how it's making disciples. Because if you can't, why are we all here? And as you find out, when you plant a church, disciples made are like the fuel of a church plant. If you don't make disciples, you're probably just going to lose your church. If you've got an established church, you don't have to make disciples. You can just run kids programs, Or like there's 200 of you, some disciples are going to get made somewhere, right? Something good's going to happen, but like I don't have to do it. You know, I'll see it every once in a while. There'll be a baptism, and you know, it's all good. But if you're a church of 20 people, it's really visible if you're not making disciples. Like you're taking the payment, and like you're not making disciples. So it's super important as a leader that, on the other hand, you don't overpromise. You're not like full of bluster, but equally, as you form a team, you are working out what you're going to do. Does that make sense? You can stop me anytime.
It just made me. I think it's really helpful because I often feel the tension of like helping everyone feel like confident that I know what I'm talking about, but also like giving space for other people to suggest things, or for a vulnerability of like I don't know everything. Do you know what I mean?
That's the art of war right there.
Yeah.
The art of war.
Yeah.
The REAP course is Antioch's version of the art of war.
What is this picture?
It's just like it's a council of war, you know. I mean, like somebody's there saying, "Let's elephants. Why don't we take the elephants with us?" Somebody, no, that's crazy. You can't get them over the Alps. I don't know what they're doing. You know, it's just a picture. It's a council of war. Why don't we buy Ukraine? No, that's just colonialism. No, let's do it. Anyway, all right, next one. So this is the slide from last, is the only slide from last year. So one of the constant themes here is that your evangelism networks are going to end up here in this space. So here is your call, and here is your opportunity. Now, most church plants lean into highly open groups and people who can pay quicker. So most church plants generally will move into two areas. They'll either go hipster or they'll go ethnic, because there's basically a demand. I mean, they'll respond to demand. Like all these young professionals are moving to Central. Hey, there's a church plant. It's like, oh look, you know, there's 500 new Carolyn nurses. There's a church plant. Now that's not wrong. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I don't feel that it's kind of quite our call. So in one sense, we're called into something tougher. And then there's opportunity. So given that you've got a call, like who's responding? And actually one of the things that really interested me when I first came back to the UK like 15 years ago, it was like, oh, we're going to work with like Muslim majority groups. And it was like, okay, so we've got this call. And who are we working with? Like 50-year-old community leaders. It's like, that's not really an opportunity, is it? Because they're not like really open. In fact, their calling card is, I'm going to keep everyone Muslim. So it doesn't seem like a great investment there. So whatever you're trying to do, there's an overlap between call and opportunity, and that's where you as a leader are going to be pointing people. It's fine to go for low-hanging fruit, but low-hanging fruit within your call. And Antioch doesn't go for the lowest hanging fruit generally. I mean, apart from City Life Church, which is all Chinese and Iranians, which is, you know, the lowest fruit in the whole city. It's like, you're just like, yeah, whatever. Come in, boys. Yeah, you're welcome. I appreciate it. Wide call, just lean into the opportunity. That's the way to do it. We're gonna go through some of the calls later, some of these stories later. But that thing there, and that is in your text, the overlap between call and opportunity, and that is a consistent theme. So I remember talking to my daughter as she was about to go to Egypt, where she works with in mission with Sudanese refugees. She said, "Look, I've got this tea set, showing how they make Sudanese tea and coffee," and it's like, no, that's not what we're saying here. You put up these videos of like young Sudanese women, sitting in the streets shouting, "What do we want? Revolution! When do we want it? Now! I don't care if I take a bullet. We want revolution!" And it's like that's kind of what we're talking about. And as we, for example, as we are in Hope Church looking at the Cave of Adullam on Sunday, and it says all of those who are in distress or in debt or discontented sought David out of the cave. And in one sense, that's your opportunity. If people are not discontented, or sometimes if they're not in distress, they ain't coming.
Yeah.
Call an opportunity overlap. And that, those revolution moments, those are the ones where you can, push in. And that as a leader is one of the things you want to be identifying. Cool. I'm just gonna, before we'll take a pause midway through. So if you look up like one culture or monoculture, it's always seen as a bad thing. But if you just pull up a picture of a coronation party, you'll just get a happy view of a single culture environment. The thing about one culture churches is that they are to some extent easier to plant. And the reason for that is that what works for you as a church will also work for you missionally. Like, it's not a problem. You can seamlessly integrate people because the boundaries that you have will also be the boundaries that they have. So in one church I was in, there was an emphasis, I wasn't leading this one, there was an emphasis on sort of reaching out to Muslims. And the reader's husband, as part of a kind of church start activity, blew some balloons up and put them, under his jumper or whatever. And the activity was to prick the balloons, and it's like, I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with those boundaries, but I definitely know that the people we're trying to invite from, like Islamic Old Trafford, it's like you lost them. One balloon and you lost them. And so the thing is, we were trying to work with like just conflicting boundaries, which you don't have when you're inside a culture. Like and that's actually, if you look, there's a whole theory around this, homogeneous unit theory. If you Rick Warren obviously wrote a very famous book called A Purpose-Driven Life, but before that he wrote a book called A Purpose-Driven Church, which was all about how your church reaches out within a particular culture. You can't do everything, you've got to do one thing. And this is a big advantage of one culture plants, that to some extent you can keep the church going while doing mission, and it can kind of work for everybody. So that as you look into your missional opportunities, you're looking at people that you're looking at patterns of thinking that you might understand quite well. So that's one culture plant. So as you become the kind of sensei who tells people where the fruit is, go and throw a fish hook into the sea and it'll come up with money in its mouth, whatever. It's like you do kind of know, you have some sense of where you are, but the main thing is you can match your church and your mission. The issue on cross-cultural plants, particularly with new disciples, and this is all of us at Antioch, is that it's actually much harder to do, because making church work for everybody is a big challenge, because people are just on different pages the whole time. And particularly if you get a church that sets out to reach people cross a tough culture boundary. So you say, well, we're going to reach Somalis, or we're going to reach skaters. Grief. The most vicious abuse I've ever had in evangelism has come from like hipsters with skateboards. I mean, in this country. But so when you're doing a cross-cultural plant, it's often like hard for you to mesh what works for your congregation with what works for your mission group, and you're constantly mediating those things. If you push it too far one way, you can end up thinking, well, we're putting on church for people who aren't here, which is our job, but they aren't here. You can have a bad week and they're not there, and it's like, what are we all doing here? Whereas if you say, well, actually, we're going to make it work for people who are here, you've just drawn boundaries and put up culture barriers. They're actually going to stop those people coming in. See what I mean? So cross-cultural plants have their own kind of challenges. So one of the things Daniel's facing, for example, is you've almost got kind of oil and water, and trying to get them to mix into a single whole is, you know, it's pretty challenging.
Is that the Iranians and the Chinese? Or?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm making the effort, but one of the greatest challenges I see is, having reliable leaders who can help become, an intermediary between me and somebody, help me to penetrate or make more disciples into those cultures.
Sure.
So when some key leaders who can easily speak the language and all, when they are not around, like Kale and Sylvia currently, then it's quite a tougher challenge. You need to, penetrate, do more.
Yeah, and sometimes there was one church I know in Derby that had this outreach that was really effective with the Iranians. They actually just folded it straight back into the church because they felt the church couldn't cope with it.
Wow.
So anyway, those are kind of cross-cultural plants and the sort of challenges of cross-cultural plants. I think one of the big tensions that I see a lot of, I've seen more than once, is that wherever you plant in an Antioch style environment, there will be a kind of shift towards the mentally ill and drug addicted. Because they're going to respond, they're going to come into your church. They'll be like the first responders. What are you going to do then? And in more than one church, including City Life Church, and know what's happening in Rochdale, you've had people saying, well, church for the lost, the least are lost. And then somebody else is like, yeah, but like, are they taking it seriously? They're not ready to come into a room. Blah, blah, blah. And you'll get a kind of, and you'll actually get people peeling away, and some people wanting to focus on that, and some people not wanting to focus on it. So it's not just you guys. I'm like, I've seen it elsewhere. And that's a big question, particularly in inner city church plants.
John, can I just ask, do you feel like, in terms of kind of cross-cultural stuff, in your experience, do you think class or ethnicity are more the bigger gulf to kind of bridge in terms of integrating people from different backgrounds?
Are you saying that class within, like, say, British culture as over and against multi-ethnic, or class and ethnic in a diverse church?
I've spoken to a few church leaders who have said how that in some cases, churches that are very kind of a mixture of ethnicities, but where nearly all of them are professionals, the doctors and so on. And if you're in a hospital, it's like the world in one building. So, but there's some extent to which there's like a common education level, and then I've heard some people say how the gulf sometimes between a really working class estate and a more kind of middle class church is quite challenging as well. So
No,
I'm just
I
wondering.
mean, that would say, I mean, my first, like the first time I ever did full-time Christian work between school and university, and I was working for a middle class church, and I focused on an estate, and it was just you just couldn't. It was just like very very difficult. I tried to apply the Bible study things that I was taught as a kid. Somebody, you're in a Bible study, somebody asks you a question, you say, well, what does it say? Oh, I don't know either answer your question. The Bible's going to answer your question. It's like, I know, I can't read. It's like, okay, that's the thing.
Yeah.
However, I think if you look at churches that kind of prosper, like Platt, for example, prospers now as a multicultural church. You know, its pastor is half British, and the other half is genetically Sri Lankan and Zimbabwean by adoption.
Wow.
But the guy grew up in Cambridge and has got a PhD degree and a PhD from Oxford. It's like in terms of class, he's like super educated, and that often those kind of churches, they can work well across sort of professional boundaries, but we as Antioch are not called. And I think it's also interesting, like even within ethnic groups, for example, among Kurds, I would tend to identify two kinds of Kurds: the kind of street Kurds, and then the kind of literati, educated, got a Dutch passport kind of Kurds, who tend to operate on a completely different level from the guys who've smuggled themselves into trucks or got boats and stuff.
Okay.
You can see like class things appearing, even within ethnic groups. So a joke I used to crack when I was at TCC is we can reach the middle class of every nation and the working class of none. Didn't quite seem to kind of. I mean, it's not like we are. I would say we're seeing change now.
That's good.
And I think you have to keep your eye on class, even if you're operating. I mean, you know, like if you look at Africans.
Yeah.
I mean, some people, or even worse, some people are as like, well, they're African ethnic, so it's like, no, there's no so that follows that. No so follows their African ethnic so. I mean, they could be anything.
Yeah.
You know, they might be Caribbean, they might be African, they might be, you know, they might have spent their whole lives here. You don't know anything about their class or their nothing. Nothing.
Yeah.
So, and that's nothing. Obviously, race and culture are not the same thing. Okay, so I'm going to take a little pause there. Are there any other questions before we crack on to the sort of slightly deeper second half? Remember, it's about cooking the thing up. It's not about executing it.
Yeah. So in City Life, for instance, we could have two English tables. You know, speaking English, do not identify with the patients but they are all, you know, they all have different cultural backgrounds, you know, and so it also make it a little tricky to see the best way to penetrate because they are actually different. Like we have some guys from Bulgaria, we have some guys from Italy, and others, a lady from Italy, and such a mixture, you know, all together, you know. How do you get one? Like if I'm dealing with a patient, I can have one strategy. Where if I'm giving the Cantonese speakers, I can assume this is the way they might be thinking, but with that diverse but identifying as English speakers, it's not so easy to have one strategy to you know, deal with them. And I'm wondering what you suggest in such scenario.
Dan?
Yeah, I mean, we not on your scale probably, but in Tom and I's church we have a couple of Hong Kong families and Congolese.
It's like it's not gonna work. And actually, for people having confidence to invite.
And like we had a couple of weeks ago, we had a whole load of new people come. One guy was Nigerian, couple, white English and Pakistani, and then another one,
You can't.
single mom. Sorry.
And you can't put the Portuguese guy as well.
Oh yes. Sorry. Yeah, forgot. We got Angolan Portuguese.
How do they find out about the church?
Through probably our two main is school and food bank, and then from that, like, people within church. So we have two Hong Kong families, because the first Hong Kong family invited the second Hong Kong family. But the week where all these new people came, like, so I was talking to one who's a single mom who's mixed race, and she was like, "This is so diverse," and like she really like loved it, and it was like, okay, that gives you sort of encouragement and fuel to kind of keep going. I suppose that something that maybe we have that helps us that might be harder for you is because we're in like Wythenshawe, there's like a sense of like anyone who's come in who's not like English first language English, there's almost an acceptance that they're trying to like blend in and be, do you know what I mean? Whereas I imagine that's slightly less refined in the city centre. There's just like such a melting pot, and people might not. So that there's an acceptance that we're aiming to like be English speaking and everyone. Do you know what I mean?
But actually, relatively few churches are diverse. Diversity is kind of the exception. It's not easy. Anyway, we're going to move on because we're on 5, thinking about your evangelism. So I'm really short of time. I'm going to rip through these. So wisdom is your technician, is just knowing how to reach people, knowing what communicates, knowing what's going to make a difference. And on the one hand, this can kind of go off onto the woods of sort of just technical, do these things and everything will be fine. And it can become very mechanistic. And it doesn't feel like there's a lot of Christ in it. On the other hand, you know, when you go to university, when you do this, when you do that, when you do the other, people are saying, get it right. You know, just get it right. And if you get it wrong, fix it. It's your job. And it's like, yeah, it's my job. And sometimes Christians can be like, I think, shockingly indifferent to whether what they're doing is actually reaching people and making disciples. Again, I was at a conference, I'm bad-mouthing someone again. I was at a conference and they was this speaker. The wisdom of knowing what really makes a difference is, it can be mechanistic and it can be functional, or it can be almost like a kind of worship. It's like, Lord, if I'm wrong, show me. It's like, I really want to know what's going to make a difference. You know, I really want to know what's going to lead people to Christ. So I don't think being craftsmanlike and having the ability, I think we want to model a self-critical approach because we're in a culture that doesn't accept criticism, so we can at least accept our own criticism. You know, that's not a bad thing to do, right? It's like, are we doing it? And look, it's hard. I remember like challenging my wife at one point, saying, you know, and there was a group of them, they were doing some women's ministry, and it's like, what are you doing? And like, we're doing this. What's the goal? Friendship is like, friendship is not a goal of the church. Reaching people is, serving people is, but being friends with people is not. It's not why we're here. And it's like, well, okay, well, you know, we're trying to reach people. It's like, well, are you reaching people? Well, it doesn't really work like that. And it's like, well, okay, how does it work? So this is about being craftsmanlike and explaining to your team like what you think's really gonna reach people. And often that can be based around you. Some people can probably do a food bank really well. Food banks just depress me. You know, I'd rather do street art. This has been craftsmanlike. And the next one is actually looking up to heaven. You know, it says, no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws. That actually, if your church is not a temple of the Holy Spirit, it's not the body of Christ, it's not the assembly of God the Father, then ultimately your main evangelist, who is God the Father through the Holy Spirit, will not be sending people to your church, which would be super sad, because then you're going to have to do all the work, and Almighty God will not be helping you, which will make your life very difficult and miserable. You know, and it's worth just keeping that perspective. I had to do a thing at college, and it was like the contextual gospel. I couldn't bear it. It's like, you know, this is the last time we see the word gospel in the Bible, an angel flying through heaven with the eternal gospel. There's something eternal about the gospel that lies at the heart of the Father. It's the power of God for the salvation of all who believe. First the Jew and then the Gentile. And it's like, this isn't, it's not to reject the craftsmanship, you know, as your leader when you're leading and you gather people. We don't want to reject that. It's not nonsense. It's worth knowing, and in your humility, you apply yourself to the task. Sure. But the one who does the work is Christ.
Yeah.
And you know, like you're saying, like every church ultimately is going to thrive because people invite their friends. Ultimately, that's what's going to make the difference. So you just got to keep that perspective as well. You hold these things together: wisdom knowing what matters, and faith knowing what matters.
We had a funny moment with the second.
Aligning what you do with who you are and what you do. So each church has a shape. So again, we're in the planning phase. And what you do is going to shape your culture. It's going to shape who you are. On the one hand, I find that like churches that do outreach, door knocking and stuff, they thrive. And it's partly because the actual effect of the door knocking, but part of it is also because people are like, well, okay, I get what's going on here. You guys got a heart for the lost, you know, okay, I get that. I see that. And so, I mean, like New Life Church in Salford, it's almost like being carved out of a rock of street work, where they, about the same distance the other way, it's like, we're going to be doing a Bible study in there tomorrow. Do you want to come? And I like that, to see people come.
That's great.
But again, you don't want to make it force. It's not down to you. Street work isn't the only way of doing it. Short time, so I'm going to click on.
Okay.
So finally, you can react to whoever is with you. It's like, why don't we just build the church around, well, whoever comes, you know, that will be our outreach strategies, your friends and your friends and your friends and your friends. Now, this in ways sounds like a great idea. However, it has two significant flaws. One is applying Antioch's standard equations. You're going to lose 50% of people in your launch team. So if you do that and you build your entire strategy around reaching Malaysians because you have a Malaysian family, and then you don't have a Malaysian family, it just feels kind of weird. So that's point number one. Point number two is that you as a leader in step 4 are kind of really setting the direction for the church. And if you just say, well, look, you know, if you turn up on my launch team, I'll give you a 25% stake in the business. Next thing you know, it will be partly kind of an app development company, partly an egg marketing board, partly a kind of surfing holiday and, you know, Haggadah, what it will be. But the point is, you won't
Fully
have,
popular.
you won't have a kind of clear. You won't be able to set direction for people.
Yeah.
You know, it's said, you know, without, you know, that you, without the word, you know, the people perish. Without vision, the people
Yeah.
perish.
Yeah.
Without a sense of why we're here, the people perish. You know, people have got to know why we're here. So that's, you know, that's important. Now, actually, this guy's just got married, and he introduced this guy's brother to the church. And it was really important for us, actually. Kaleem has been a huge influence in the church because we really felt like as we go into alongside, we want to be able to reach Pakistanis. It's like, it sounds brutal, but somebody's got to do it. And Kaleem is absolutely amazing. He's an amazing guy. He's so cheerful. And the fact that he came with us was super important. So that was a kind of like, yeah, you're coming with us, okay. This is definitely going to be part of what we're doing. But equally, he came with us because we had that, you know. So you can react to who's with you, but you don't want to like give away your vision at this stage. If you find later on in the church planning process that, well, that's the way it's been going, so that's what we're going to adapt to. I don't think anyone in City Life thought Chinese and Iranian. Let's do that. But that's where it ended up. And in some sense, that's okay. But you don't want to sit there like in the early stages saying, you know, mixing my metaphors, you know, sure, that's great. You know, let's add a bit of beef into that, a bit of banana, sure. You know, what have you got? So
Okay.
we've got a bit of sort of wasabi